Hello, everybody. We really are The Last of Us here, talking about the HBO show The Last of Us.
Rudd already died.
I'm almost dead at this point. I'm your TechRaptor features editor, Robert Scarpanito.
And Rotten editor-in-chief.
Andrew Stretch, fun guy editor.
Christian Buckley, social lead.
Fun guy editor.
If only he wasn't recording, we could kick him out.
Get him all the power.
Yeah. This is going to be our little discussion about the Last of Us show on HBO Max. As of yesterday of the recording time, the finale has been out for season 1. We're here to chat about it. So this first few minutes or so, we're not going to spoil anything beyond episode 3 or so. So if you haven't seen all of it yet and just want to know if we think you should watch it, now this is the time to find out. Then after that, it's going to be full spoilers about season 1, but we will not be spoiling anything about part 2, the video game, until the end. If you are, a TV only person going in blind, we'll let you know before you get spoiled on that sort of stuff.
For those watching, we'll have the links in the description for the timestamps of when we start talking about certain spoilers. You will see spoiler there below the screen when we get to regular spoilers, and it will start flashing once we go into super spoilers. So
if you all understand the fucking rules,
now roll your dice. But let's start off.
Open to page 3.
Of course, Stretch has a die.
It turns into a dragon as well.
Oh, like that one.
That's the other HBO show we're not talking about.
Well, let's start off with our general thoughts on the season as a whole. Would we recommend the show to people?
I think that's going to be a resounding yes.
Yeah,
resounding.
It's going to be. I think it would be hard to find many people who do not know that this is something that should be on their radar at this point.
Absolutely, and I think HBO's got an insane pedigree of really good shows, and I think this comfortably sits among them pretty easily.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of success too, it's reaching audiences that other HBO shows dream of.
Huge.
So it's, I think with the exception of maybe the Super Bowl week, because they shifted the release of that one, it's just been an exponential increase in terms of viewership, and that just doesn't happen. So if you haven't done that yet, then yes, get in on it, because you can binge it now. Sure. It's probably a really good binge too.
Yeah, I was thinking that exact same thing about the numbers. Rarely do you see those numbers continue to grow week after week for a show. I think when it first came out, right, it was less than half the viewership of the first episode of House of the Dragon, which everyone was expecting to be kind of big because it's the prequel to a pretty big show despite the last season. And now I think at least up to episode 8 of The Last of Us, it was getting really close to those numbers the House of the Dragon hit. And I don't think the numbers are out yet for episode 9 at the time of recording. But I would not be surprised if
I'm sure it's going to go past them.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
particularly once word of mouth gets out, because it's
a
pretty crazy ending to a story.
Yeah. I think I was telling one of my coworkers that if you don't watch it, you're gonna know about the ending for the same reason you know about the Sopranos ending.
Yeah,
I haven't watched the Sopranos. I know how it ends. I'm sure there are many other people like that because it's just talked about, right? It's just part of the pop culture lexicon.
It's for someone who so long, so often, storytelling in video game has been put down. People joke about bad dialogue, this, that, whatever. It's really cool to have had such a game that people were already defining as watching a movie or watching a TV show into the TV space, and they nailed it. They truly nailed it from start to finish. They even fleshed out the world even further, where a video game adaptation of a TV show needs to look at that TV show and say, how can we make that more gamey? I think that the way that the series creators for this looked at the game and said, how can we make this more story, was really phenomenal.
Yeah, I think just about every addition that they made was really good.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people that are going to be is the game better or the show better? I think that's the wrong question. They're accomplishing two different goals, but also Neil was involved in this heavily. He wrote it and directed an episode and all that stuff. this is also his second pass at the story, so he can see these little things that he's had 10 years to sit on and think about. He's like, oh, we can add a little thing here, tweak a little thing here. So he's had lots of time to, do a second draft, or well, second final draft on.
Yeah.
Because
I think also
he looked at Joel and was like, how can we make him more handsome? And then they cast Pedro Pascal.
Well, in addition to that too, I think something that I was really curious about with adapting this and what you were saying, Stretch, about like the gaminess versus showiness, there's a lack of player connection, right, to these characters, specifically, well, Joel and Ellie, but with Joel, no spoilers, but when you get to the ending, it's like those things hit because you spent however long controlling him and like playing as him. The show doesn't have that like affordance of connection with the audience, so like they have to characterize him, I think, better than the game ever did. And a lot of the choices they made for him and adding to his backstory, his mental state, I think for me made a lot of the elements of the show's story and the story of The Last of Us in general just hit harder, because it's like, oh, you're doing more character work, and I appreciate that. Like in the game, we get some like asides when you're moving boxes around, but you can't do that in the show. So it's like, well, might as well give them an issue.
That's maybe one of my criticisms of the show. I feel like there could have been a solid 90 more minutes of moving boxes and holding triangle to tell Ellie to go up there. I feel like that would have really improved, like made it truly Oscar worthy.
Oscars. This isn't a movie.
I don't know my awards. Okay, the only one that matters are the TechRaptor Game of the Year awards.
That's true.
It's the only objectively correct
do we
one.
need to start having a TV show category now that everyone is pumping out
best adaptation? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe we make it like a bi-yearly thing, biannual.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if enough come out in a year.
Yeah. I want to go back to what something Christian said real quick. I think that's a really good point about the stronger characterization is necessary. And I think it, just to bring it back a little bit to the because it's inevitably people like game versus show all the time. I think with the game, a lot of the tension of the story and you playing the game is you are grappling with what Joel is doing and learning what he's doing and being drug along on his like passion to do what he's doing. Like his force of will is dragging you as the player along, whether you want to or not necessarily do the things that he does, because he's gonna do them. And that's kind of the tension in the game versus the show we need. Obviously we don't have that. We're passive observers to what he's up to.
I want to say let's start spoiling the first season and the whole first game kind of by by relation, right? Because I think we're trying to dance around the very final episode and describe our thoughts on it. So at this point, we are spoiling all of the first season. If you have not watched it yet, I think it's a pretty resounding group consensus. Please go watch it. You will probably enjoy it, most likely. But for now, Stretch, I'm assuming you're putting the spoiler button up.
Go watch it all and then come right back here.
Yes. Pause it right here.
The spoiler tag is live.
Yes.
Following up what Otton was just saying too, I think what I appreciated that the show did, and I think you felt this really strongly with the Sam and Henry episode specifically, but again, because you're playing The Last of Us as Joel, and The Last of Us came out in 2013 when that was like peak brown-haired white dude video game protagonist, and then eventually you get to see, like, after that game came out, creators Neil Druckmann was like, the story The Last of Us is about Joel and Ellie, and then very clearly it was like, well, it's always been Ellie's story, and I think that is where a lot of that discourse between part 1 and part 2 happens, because we were Joel and people have a connection to Joel. But I think another thing that the show did well, and I'm curious to see how the general audience responds to part 2 and season 2, is that I think this season of TV frames the story of The Last of Us around Ellie as the center point a lot stronger than the first game does, because like very traumatic moments, specifically this was called out of like when Sam and Henry die in the game, you see like Joel's reaction. This one hangs on Ellie, and then we have a lot more screen time, I think, with Ellie between Left Behind and her episodes in Winter, and then the consequences of the finale with Joel just like coming back in there. So I think the show was able to convey that a lot better, and Neil was involved, he had hindsight of where they go with part 2. So like retroactively being like, yeah, let's just make it more about like Ellie's character growth, and Joel's also there. So
See, I kind of like half agree and half don't. I think the first half of the season is still Joel's story.
sure.
I think up until the Sam and Henry episode, it feels very Joel focused, right? Even the Bill and Frank episode, a lot of that is like, let's dive into Joel's past. Like, here's how he met them with Tess, right? But I think at that Sam and Henry episode where Ellie starts to like, oh, I can cure him. I can, if it just have him nibble on my bite and it'll work, right? But obviously it doesn't. And that's where you start diving into like Ellie's psyche. Ellie is the main kind of focus for the show. And from there through the Left Behind episode up through the end, very much Ellie's story. Like I think compared to the game, I think that rampage at the end and past that, like up through the end of the show, I think I felt more uncomfortable with Joel in the show than I did in the game. Because in the game, it's like, oh, I was playing as Joel, so I kind of feel stuck with him no matter what and connected to him. But now in the show, like I think that hike at the end where Joel's like, I think you would have loved my daughter Sarah because she and I would go on these hikes all the time.
Yeah.
That felt like there's this weird tension. Like I don't want to be here. I don't know if Ellie wants to be here. Kind of vibe.
And that's definitely present in the game. I just think also with like David being a pedophile, like I think the show had to like sort of look back at some of the story beats of that first game and be like, hey, some of these things were a bit too subtle for our audience. We got to make it a bit more overt. So like I think specifically what you're talking about with that tension between the two of them at the end, like that's there at the end of the first game, but here it's much more like, oh, Ellie kind of knows.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to help moving forward, and I will stop with that there.
Well, I think some of that's awkwardness of like, so there's some extra dialogue in there that's not from the game. For the most part, the end of like very end moments of the show are 1-to-1 almost to the game. But there's some added stuff in that where you're talking about like, I think you would have liked my daughter. I think you would have made her laugh. I think you're funny. That wasn't in the game. I went and rewatch some stuff to see what was different. So I was like, I don't remember that. But it's almost like it's a revelation of what's making Ellie uncomfortable, I think, is that she's become his daughter.
Yeah.
And she's taking her place, and that he is projecting a lot of all his stuff that he felt for her because he's bottled it up for so long. He's finally decided, okay, I can have this relationship. It's all coming out. And I think they hit the head on that a lot more in the show than they did in the game, I think.
The panic and dependence that Joel has, especially as he's saying to like Marlene, like, you can't do this. Like, you can't do this to me, especially after he's just revealed to Ellie that there was a point that he was going to take his own life and that it all made sense to him. Like, there was nothing else. So why wouldn't he just do that? To have him just so openly admit it. And I think that a lot of like the awkwardness and the creepiness in that at the end is kind of he's trying to apologize to her without her knowing why he is apologizing. With him trying to, he's afraid of losing her because of what he's just done. So he's trying to hold on to her tighter than ever.
Yeah.
And that's the trying to like, hey, do you want to learn guitar? You could learn guitar. Or I guess that was even earlier than that. So I guess he was just kind of weird all season.
It was like right after the awfulness with David and stuff. That's when. So the beginning of this episode was basically he had a whole different vibe of like with Ellie.
Yeah, he was Papa Joel in this episode.
Yeah. And
Which
this
is
is
also
the only
weird
time we
'cause
really saw it.
It was then juxtaposed with a very quiet Ellie for the entire episode. That isn't very common for her.
No. But I mean, in this part of the game, she was the same kind of quiet, distant.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Like, I mean, she just had some crazy shit happen.
Oh yeah, 100%. But it's just like it kind of the entire episode kind of feels like a step and a half to the left. Like there's just an unsettled like feeling even with these characters that we have known for so long. Everything is just a bit off kilter.
Yeah.
And while we were talking about additions that the show added, two that I really noticed that I really liked in this last episode was There's that scene where Marlene tries to stop Joel, like at the end in the garage, right? Where when I rewatch that cutscene in the game, Joel's pretty adamant about like, I'm not just saving her. It's that this is not your decision to make, Marlene. This is not like your decision to kill her to save the world. And in the show, they added this line where Marlene says, "It's not your choice either," which I thought was pretty strong. In that it's just adding to that the characterization, right? Where for the longest time, Joel thinks he's doing the right thing, and I think there's this kind of, it's like the gamer brain thing where I'm playing the protagonist. I'm always doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. I'm never doing anything bad except in Spec Ops: The Line, because that game explicitly tells you you're doing something bad. But in The Last of Us, there's no loading screen that says like, "Do you feel good about what you did, Joel?" Like, there's no loading screen about that. So in the show, they kind of, need to do something else that like challenges Joel's motivations.
I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think another thing that gets lost with the end of this game and story, gamer brain, as you said, people get hung up on it like, well, the cure wouldn't have even worked because it's like it was a dirty hospital room. It's like that's not the point, like that's not the reason the end of this game is so ripple effect divisive for like every facet of this story and discussion. The point is, Ellie spends this entire like middle of this show and story forcibly having to fight for herself, like be on her own, which like she was like a punk kid before, but like now it's like seriously real. And then immediately after that, she's babied by Joel, and her decisions taken away from the two people who have known her the longest, I guess, as adults, of Joel and Marlene, in different ways. So like whatever her response is to that, it's like she just wanted to be viewed as an adult, and the choice was taken away. There was no consent from either party, and that's why it's an issue. It's not like, well, the cure would have worked. Well, Joel didn't trust the cure. Like that is not the point of this ending, and I think
Joel's an anti-vaxxer.
Exactly. But because you're playing
Texas.
I mean, in his defense, in this case, a vaccine would have killed his surrogate daughter.
That's true. That's true. He was actually onto something.
But I think people get hung up on that part,
Yeah.
And I think adding in that extra line is very, current day Naughty Dog of them to be like, no, it's all gray,
Well, I think it's that, but I think it reinforces even further that he is taking something away from her. When you think back to the scene right after the giraffe, he's like, "Hey man, we can just turn around. We don't have to do any of this shit."
Yeah.
And Ellie's like, "No, we have to see this through. Like, it has to be worth something. Like, everything that's happened has to matter." And so he already knows. It's in the back of his brain, even though obviously he didn't give any fucking thought to what he was going to do in that hospital at all. His mind was made up immediately. He totally went against what she wanted. Completely. And I think that little addition reinforces it just even more, that this was a ultimately selfish choice, right or wrong, of Joel's, but we understand it, why he did it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I think the show, it explicitly makes it more clear why you can understand it, right? Because it adds on to that gray Naughty Dog storytelling you mentioned, Christian, where if I remember right, I don't think in the game it's ever been discussed that Joel tried to kill himself at one point.
Oh, that's brand
new.
It's kind of alluded to in one little sentence. Because I looked this up too. Because I was wondering if this is gonna be your other addition that you liked. Because this scene's totally new. Is one of my favorite moments of the show. But in the game, there's a little line where if it's one of those where Ellie like stops at a like bathtub that's got someone that killed themselves in it, and it's a little prompt to talk to her, and she sent something like, "Oh, they took the easy way out, huh?" or something like that. And Joel's like, "No, trust me, it's not easy. That's hard," and that's it.
Oh yeah.
So they don't ever explicitly tell you anything, but obviously there's some subtext there. Like, oh, okay, so there's some shit that he hasn't told us.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that you say that does.
That's it though, because I looked it up. I was like, I do not remember this conversation at all.
But I think the conversation in the show was fantastic because it kind of it sets up that it's very clear that Ellie saved Joel, right? And this is him kind of returning the favor, but in the worst way to Ellie, right? Like this is a way that Ellie would not want him to return that favor.
I don't see it as returning the favor. I think it reinforces his selfishness that he has been saved by her in a way, because he was almost saying like, I was more or less still in that mindset until he had a change of heart with her. Like he was still like, who the fuck gives a shit about whatever, life sucks. And
it makes you feel bad for Tess.
yeah, right. Yeah. And he made the choice that he wanted to keep that going because he wasn't going to let another daughter die because of his failure, kind of thing. I think it was more that than returning the favor.
Yeah, I guess returning the favor isn't the right way to phrase it, right? But it does make it very clear that he can't lose again, right? Because if he loses her, then it really is like, he's already tried to kill himself once, and it was hard for him the first time, but now, at what point would he stop, right?
It's like he spends so much of the entire show seeming so stable and so held together and so like on top of his shit, like I know what to do to keep me and mine safe, and you really see the cracks forming. As he's like, what if I lose Ellie? What if this happens? What if that happens? Something else, like him going from, when Ellie asked like, oh, who's Sarah? When they were at the camp, and that was only in episode 6, when she said, oh, who's Sarah? And he just turned it, don't say her name. And how closed off and distant he was to really offering information, or, even, when they were like, oh, is this a Fedra camp? No, it's Army. Oh, I was here in the first days. Were you here with Sarah? No, she was already gone by then. He seems much more calm and collected, and also like we don't exactly know the span of time. They're pretty vague about that. Like you can see seasons change, but like his come to grips, his let the walls down a bit, but then that also leaves him teetering.
I think another thing that this conversation is making me think about is another change they added to the show, and that's that Tommy's going to be a father now, right? Because like I'm curious to see how Joel works into that like uncle relationship in this show, like assuming we get to see that at some point, because like on that angle too, it kind of makes it worse with the selfishness, because like your brother's going to have a child that is going to have to grow up in this world that you could have had a thing to like help that life be better, but instead this random girl who doesn't really even like maybe like look at you that much as a father, like a protector, but like on that familial relationship, not really. So like I'm curious to see how that unfolds too.
It'd be interesting to see if he has that realization, because obviously that was not a consideration at all for him.
For sure,
but I would be curious if he comes, like if that is some moment he's like, oh fuck, that's right.
And now Tommy knows about it too. Like he knows that Ellie is immune and all that, right? So he's gonna know that Joel went on a little quest to maybe create a vaccine, and then something went wrong. But
he can lie to him too.
He could.
He could.
But I mean, Tommy's known Joel for what, 20 plus 30,
forever.
40 years,
right?
Like
life. Well,
literally.
Isn't he like 50?
I think in the 50? Show,
he's a little
Joel's
older,
supposed to be 56 or so.
Yeah. But before we move on from the last episode, or are we still talking about the last episode? Because there's another couple of things I want to talk about.
There's some other things I want to talk about too.
I want to talk about the opening, because I think the opening is what makes this my favorite episode of the entire season.
So good.
Ashley Johnson's great. Original Ellie, she's phenomenal. But
giving birth to the show, Ellie.
Giving birth to Ellie, and I think that choice of having that scene, they really needed it for one, and for there's some criticism I have of the show later that we can talk about, but they really needed it because it really sets the stakes for everybody involved of what's really at stake for anything. Like for Joel's kind of giving us a glimpse into what the parents, like that connection and how powerful that is for what she did in her final moments. Like her holding that knife up to her neck when Marlene shows up is fucking wild. Like she's ready to kill herself, hoping someone will show up to save Ellie because she's been bit and knows she's gonna die. But I don't even throw Marlene in there and having her be there in that moment to set for the end, so it even complicates the dynamics between her making a choice and Joel making a choice, all that, what she was saying, like she's like, yeah, I've known Ellie forever. Like I was literally there when she's born. Like I'm not making this decision fucking lightly, kind of thing.
Yeah, because in the game, Marlene says like I've known her since she was born, but we don't.
We knew that.
We don't really see it, right?
Don't see her shoot her fucking mom.
Yeah, her mom, who she's known forever.
Yeah,
and I didn't catch this, but I saw at the end, the little like about the episode stuff at the end. Like I think Craig says that Ellie's mom, Anna, is like a childhood friend of Marlene, which I didn't catch that subtext in the show, but
like she said, I've known you my whole life or something like that. Like we've known each other forever or something.
Yeah.
So that was
yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think adding that scene just kind of help. You're right, set the stakes, and it's like you can see the two sides of the argument, right? Because like you've known Joel's whole thing since episode 1, right? And now you're getting kind of Marlene's whole thing / Ellie and her mom.
Well, I think it is important for Ellie, but I also think it's important of this is what it's like in this world for a child to be born. This is what Joel could have helped prevent happening ever again, but he's not.
I think also it's adding in. I know I was just saying like the cure was never the thing. It was never like the point. But I think for the audience, this was also really important because we know Ellie's important. We know how like rare her condition is from the moment we meet her. But I think here it's like, oh, you have to have a very hyper specific scenario if you ever wanted to replicate this, and it would probably not even work. Where you have to have a woman who is going into labor, get bit, deliver the child before she turns, and before the infection's able to like corrupt her immune system, but long enough for the child to get some of that, immune response of her body to carry on. Like that is so hyper specific for the audience to see that of like, that is what it might take for somebody to be able to go through this again.
It's just a fluke.
Exactly. So like that whole idea of like, well, they could just find somebody else if she was able to, like, clearly somebody else could, like, they make it a point to be like, hey, this is like 1 in a million, so
because it does create that idea, like, sure, you could try to replicate it, but then like how long does it have to be between being bit and giving birth? Is it like 2 minutes, minute and a half? How much human experimentation are you willing to do to get
it
that,
could even
right?
be down to like the level of adrenaline that was going through Anna's veins. Like it could be anything that shifts that. It does do some interesting stuff to like confirm that, yes, Ellie has the same cordyceps. They're not like different types of cordyceps or anything like that. So it's just, the same cordyceps, but filtered in some way, because she does show positive. She just doesn't have all of the other negative effects.
Yeah. And I think for the audience, like, including that is another way, like, you have the play, like the detachment from like the actual firsthand experience of these events, where as a player, it's like, oh, my relationship with Ellie through Joel is at stake here, so I want to go protect her. But for like, or like when you see that, like, her risk and making that choice, it's like, I understand why Joel's doing that. And here, again, like, feeling like it's a bit more unsettling because that's gone, and you also see all these elements at play of what he took away, like beyond just that relationship, but like with the Fireflies, with everything else. Like, I think that was important for people who haven't played the game to like really understand the weight of it outside of like what it means for the characters. Because Neil has also been very vocal of like, yeah, if they did it, probably would have worked, so like I think integrating that into the show in a way is like interesting.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a backlash in a way to the fan response over the past decade. Because
like,
I mean, Neil's probably been thinking about it.
Yeah,
all the people who could be like, well, it's left up to interpretation. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually really not. No. Shut up. It was a bad thing.
Yeah,
it was a bad thing for the world. It was a good thing for Joel.
And you get a lot of that in this show, right? Just in general, of making things that were too subtle in the game a little less subtle. Like the entirety of episode 3 is. So if I remember right, in the game, Bill just says, "Oh, he was my partner," and that could have been like, "Oh, just like my pal that I hang around with."
Well, I think there is a note that kind of lays it out.
Right, but just in terms of like the text on like you have to read some subtext or read into some subtext to get it. But here it's like no, yeah, he's gay. Like there's a whole episode and they kiss many times. It's pretty clear.
Episode.
Yeah, I mean, gamers, they don't understand subtext. They gotta have yellow X's on everything. They gotta be like big sign, like break this.
Well, speaking of, that just reminded me. Did you see the little yellow smear of paint by the ladder when he has to go get?
Oh no, I missed that. That's cool.
There's a little bit of yellow right there. I was like, oh, that's good call. Not many people are gonna notice that, but
yeah, like TV people.
That they did do a whole like, let me help you up there. You drop down that ladder, and then we finally got the giraffe scene as well.
Yeah,
which was gorgeous.
Real giraffe.
Fooled me. I thought it was CG.
Yeah. No, definitely in the close shots, at least, that was definitely a real giraffe, which was really cool. Do we want to start talking about going into the future and, what everything's set up for and means for season 2 and season 3 of The Last of Us?
Not quite yet. Before we get to that, I got some other things about the season I want to talk about.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Well, you go first.
The negative points?
No, I mean there's some negative stuff. I think well, I guess we can talk about that. But I think the show, one of the ways it suffered is without doing some pretty heavy scenes, they didn't have much time with. That was a lot of Joel and Ellie time, really, in terms of seeing a relationship develop. Like I think we have to make a lot of jumps. Like okay, like he sees her as a daughter, blah blah, and it's done it very quickly. Where like the game obviously had the benefit of like you're hanging out with your hours of just whatever, talking back and forth, bantering, so you get the feeling that you know the person more. So I think that kind of sucked a little bit. It's like, well, there wasn't a lot of Joel and Ellie time with one another.
What's interesting about that in terms of like the conversations I've had with as the season's gone on with like people who have played the game and people who haven't, that critique is very common with people who have played the game. Where when I bring that up to people who haven't, they're like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "I thought it was like very clear," and I was like, "That's very interesting." Because again, as people who played the game, you're right. We get all those walk over to Ellie, press triangle, get a little quip, and I agree with you. If for somebody who's experienced that story in a slower, not one take sort of way, but like gameplay, you stew on it longer, and I think that helps, and I think that informs a lot of my own feelings with like their moments in the show because I'm like drawing from that too.
Because I think there is just a lot of, I think the game, like as a medium, right, gives you a lot of moments to have these little non sequiturs that don't really matter to the whole overall plot, right? Like I am thinking of like that bathtub scene you mentioned earlier on, not necessarily directly related to the plot, but it's like the side thing. You go into another room, you're exploring for some bolts or shit, and then you can press triangle and like, oh, here's a little moment between these two. Or there's even like lighter ones that are just kind of like for fun. Like I think in the show they don't do the whole I can whistle now, right? But it's not that I can remember.
I don't think so.
In the game, there's just like they set up, oh, Ellie doesn't know how to whistle. She's shit at whistling. And then at some point later in the game, like in Act 3 or whatever, it's like, oh my God, I can whistle, Like that's just a moment that you don't really get.
Well, it's like I think those small moments are why it suffers, because like when it's the times that Ellie and Joel are together where they're having the story moments together, it's always like big shit's happening. Like shit is gone down. Like we do not get to see a relationship develop in a way that like it felt kind of jarring to me a little bit, like of the complete shift in the way Joel treated Ellie. There was no like gradual little bit. No, he's always like, you're a shit. You're just somebody that you're a problem I have to fucking deal with. And it's some version of that kind of stayed until just right before the end, more or less. And it just kind of felt like, man, he didn't really get to see many, because all the stuff that she did was kind of annoying, and now suddenly it wasn't. It was endearing because he's made the choice that he likes her, essentially, and that wants to keep her around.
Yeah, they make you really, or for the people unfamiliar, they really make you like lean into that idea that like she saved his life, and that was an act of like kindness that he probably hasn't felt for a long time, and because of that, he felt indebted in a way. But yeah, I'm with you. I think for me, the only small thing in terms of not having enough time is I really wish there was like one more episode in Kansas City with like that new faction, because I really think they needed like maybe like one more to flesh that out a bit more, because that was the only thing that really didn't hit for me. Like it could have, but I don't think they did enough with that group to like make it feel as impactful as it could have.
Yeah, I think that was probably the weakest part of the show. It's like, man, like I get what they're trying to say about one oppressor replaces another. It's just a different set of bullshit you have to deal with, essentially, was kind of what they were going for.
Yeah.
But it didn't really hit.
Yeah. Like there's definitely some issues with the pacing there. I think it was definitely weird to have kind of gone from like single episode, especially when like the opening episode was like an hour 40. Kind of if they had turned that Kansas City stuff into, I think, a single like longer movie-esque episode, they might have been able to hit that pacing better. Because it did feel weird to be like, well, we're now like halfway through a story within this story. I do also hear, I guess I'm someone who played Last of Us when it first hit PS4, and I haven't really played it again since. So I definitely understood with like the changing of seasons that like time had passed, the relationship had grown. I think definitely in as short as this whole series was, it was wild that the finale was only 40 minutes. And that this whole season was only 9 episodes. But I remember a lot of those like small getting to know Ellie, getting to know Joel moments were so situational. As to like where they were, what store you happened to walk into. And I just, I would almost be worried that if you put too much of that into the show, that it would almost feel like you would have like a 40-minute episode where there was like 10 minutes padded with just random dialogue to be like, look, they're becoming friendly, rather than trust your audience to know, oh, they just went through something traumatic. They're now, laying in beds. She tells a bad pun and he responds this time and laughs. And it's like, friendship leveled up.
You see the meter go up on the screen. And
That's, Ellie will remember that. A little smiley face.
This is Telltale's The Last of Us.
I think a big question for a lot of people that I was seeing as well was how many or how few clickers were in the show, because that was also
not many zombies in the zombie show. Although I know you can't say zombie show, they don't want you to say that, but there wasn't very many.
Mushroom show. This mushroom fun guy show.
Like, I mean, there was clickers in Infected episode 2, in Endure and Survive episode 5, and in Left Behind episode 7.
Yeah.
Well, and I watch it with subtitles. I think in the beginning of episode 9, that's supposed to be a clicker that's attacking Anna. It doesn't look like a clicker, but the subtitles do say like clicker grunts or something.
Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. When I say clicker, I just mean like the broad spectrum.
Just sorry. The zombies in general.
The walkers and then clickers.
Infected.
Infected. Sorry. Yeah, I specifically meant to say infected.
The other.
There's only the 3 episodes with infected, like truly turned infected in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like even when it came out, The Last of Us' whole thing was kind of like, they had a unique take on zombies, but also a lot of the like reason that thing resonates is not the clicker encounters. Like I can think of a handful in that first game that like really stand out to me, but I understand people who went into this wanting more, I guess, but I don't know. I feel like their implementation worked. Like I never felt like they were in a world that didn't have this problem, because like we saw how bad it was in the Kansas City thing in the early episodes, and I think they make it very clear how like screwed the world is because of that. So like for me, it didn't bother me. Like the people who are really upset about it, I'm like, I don't know, I feel like The Last of Us has never really been about that, like the way The Walking Dead is or anything. So
I'm surprised there wasn't more, because to take advantage of action stuff.
Sure.
Because they spend a lot of time being like, everybody says like, oh shit, Joel's fucking bad motherfucker. Don't mess with that guy. And everybody comments on it. Even Marlene says something like, I don't want to owe a debt to you in the end. Like everybody's like, oh, don't fuck with Joel. And we do get that. And there's scenes, obviously the whole end of the hospital is like, fucking A, like, don't fuck with Joel. But they just had opportunities they didn't take to show that off more, I think, with the having infected in there.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that like the infected seem to me they do a lot more telling than showing. Like we keep getting reinforced, like, oh man, it's gonna be so impossible. Like all of the panic attacks that Joel had about like, I don't think that I'd be able to take Ellie there. I don't think that we'll be able to get there and survive. We don't see another infected past that point.
Well, I also think in that element with him and Tommy, a lot of it wasn't the infected because it was winter, and I think like a lot of zombie media, I think even The Last of Us is like, well, yeah, in the snowy areas, it's harder for them to move. So like, I that episode specifically, I think that also had like the native couple. They were talking like it's people, and that was like the big deal with like Tommy as well. So like, I think that's it really, and I think clearly the worst offender in this season was David, right? Like that was like and his people to these two characters. And that was always the standout for me too, antagonistically with the first game. It's David. So like again, I get it. I get why people want more infected stuff, but like The Last of Us is a lot more than just like the clickers.
Yeah. I think I have like two major thoughts about this. One, I think to challenge your point on about Joel is supposed to be a badass, but we don't see him be a badass with infected.
I say we do. I just say we don't see much of it. We definitely do.
We don't see much of it, but I also think almost every time we see him against human enemies, he is an absolute ruthless fucking asshole. Like, like even when he is like recovering from an infected baseball bat stab wound, he does the whole, I'm going to pop your kneecap. And now you're going to point at this map with a bloody knife and tell me, that whole thing. Right. And then even then, as he's making his way to the wherever David is, he is like still limping, fighting cold, fighting probably the remnants of an infection, and still beating the shit out of, choking him out, killing him, stabbing him, shooting him, and all that, right? Hospital scene, same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we do see those moments against other humans because I think much like every zombie show cliche, the real enemy is not the zombies. It is the other people who are trying to eat you, kill you, stab you, steal from you, etc.
Yeah.
So I don't think we really needed to see
I wasn't saying we needed to see more. I'm just saying I'm surprised we didn't for the opportunities to show Joel being fucking cool.
Yeah,
Sure.
I could see that. Yeah. But I also think because like when the show started, I replayed the game, the remaster remake of the first game for a bit. Whoa. And I only got through the scene before Tess, gets bitten and all of that. Because God, it's a fucking slog to get through some of these zombie encounters. I was so fucking because like when you know what's coming, it's like, man, this shit's so boring. I don't want to deal with this, with fighting all the sneaking around and all that. I want to get to like the good bits, which is the story. Yeah. So I think it's like a really fine edge for the show. Like I could see more infected, but when there's too much, then I could see it just being like, oh, this was a waste of half an episode, kind of a feeling.
I also think.
I guess I would like to see more infected in the same way that like we might want to see more character moments with Joel and Ellie. I'm not saying that like it needs to be an action moment, but instead of them just speaking at full volume, walking through the center of a town that we're being told is overrun by clickers, might be interesting to have them, moving across some of like the gangplank walkways, and then like have an arching shot that shows like some infected roaming below as they're just still chatting, but just like taking a different path. It just, we keep getting told how crazy it is and how badass you'd need to be to get out of this quarantine zone and go all the way over to this other location. And I never really felt like, why is that so difficult?
Yeah,
like it felt getting oil was the hardest thing to do.
I think another thing to take into account with the infected is that the show changed the lore with them a lot, like heavily early on. Where I don't know if that was a choice because I think this was filmed during like peak pandemic as well, so like there was like weird filming restrictions. But
wait, they chose. going to talk about like the spores?
No, in terms of the way that they work as like a hive mind. So like if there's one, there's 1,000, you know? So like they get that one moment in Kansas City where they're able to really go all out with it at the end.
Yeah.
So like I don't know if that shift in terms of the lore of like they are all connected, you know, like they can sense everything. So like if you're in trouble with one, you're going to be in trouble with the horde, like very Days Gone of them. I don't know if that was a choice they wanted to make for production stuff or what, but like that is significantly different from how they work in the game, where they're just kind of just individual beasts with echolocation, you know. So like,
Yeah,
I think
I don't know why
once
that change happened, but
yeah, like once you clear a room, you have all the time in the world to explore for every single cloth and scissor.
Yeah, so like if they're following through with their own logic here, if they have to deal with like a clicker, they gotta just keep moving, or else there will be a lot more. So like I don't know what.
To that point as well, we saw Anna getting chased and take one out, and then they found her just still
alone,
at night. So I think that they aren't too, or I think that there was some other rules going on with that. Like there needed to be whatever the cordyceps vines were that allows it to like work as a hive mind.
Yeah, I think that the choice is simply to make it kind of closer to how actual fungus works, and that it is a big network. Like the biggest organisms in the world are a network of fungus. Like it could be many square miles big. And it's one organism essentially. So I think it was just that. I think it was just like, it's closer to actual science in a way. We could see it's an analog, a better analog anyway.
Right.
I don't know if there was much more put into other than that. It's like, we're still going to have them do what we want them to do because that's the whole purpose of them. We can make them do what we want. But here's a cooler explanation that's a little closer to reality.
Right. Well, I mean, just thinking about, the potential for violence in general and infected, I think it also came out after the finale, right? That Craig said in an interview that there will be more infected in season 2.
Oh.
Whatever that means. But I guess we'll see more of them than this season.
It's funny because I remember killing more people in that one.
That's what I was gonna say. I feel like in part 2 they were way less infected, which is
yes,
agreed. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I guess the people who were all about violence and zombies were a little louder than you think.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and I understand why, right? Because like you think back to that E3 demo for the original game where Joel beats a man in the face with a brick and then the crowd cheers, right? Like, but so like I get why there's that culture of like, man, they cut out all the violence, they cut away from stuff. What the hell? But like, again, I think the whole thing with The Last of Us, at least for me, is like that isn't the reason that this story exists or the reason it was something that resonated. And I think before the show started as well, I think Neil and Craig were saying like there's less violence, but what's included is more impactful for it. And I think specifically with like the hospital scene with Joel, the interrogation scene, and like Sarah's death, those all hit way harder for me than they did in the game for a variety of reasons. But I think also because there was less like constant like obscene violence, like they hit harder. So I get it, but I see why people would be upset, I guess.
Like I wonder if part of it too is in the game, maybe just another gamer brain moment, right? Like I feel like violence in the gameplay that you are doing, like when you're pressing square to shove a brick into a man's face, like it doesn't feel as violent as watching the cutscene of Ellie macheteing David's face off, right? Like that somehow feels more violent than you playing as Joel pressing square with a machete to cut up a bitch. Like, it's like a weird thing where it's like that violence is fun, but the Ellie, that cutscene violence is real,
Yeah.
And I wonder with like a TV show, there isn't really that dichotomy because there's no violence you play as. It's all violence on the screen. So I think maybe they made that tactical choice where if there's less violence in general, those moments where there is, like you were saying, Christian, will hit a lot harder and have more meaning.
I think that the way they handle that is why this is such a good adaptation, because I think a lot of adaptations, they try to like they try to chase that feeling that the game gives like that. Whereas maybe people do enjoy that bit. They're like, oh, we really need to make sure we have that stuff in there because that's what the game's about. When The Last of Us, what's so impactful about its story and so important about, or well, why it works so well is it's 100% character driven. It's not a plot that we then have a character that has a personality who then reacts to the things around them. They are the driving forces about why things happen and where things go. And I think that they latching onto that instead of, oh, we're going to need to get into the gameplay or have whatever the feeling people get while playing this. That's really not what's important when you're making it to TV. I think a lot of other adaptations for stuff has tried to do too much for that. We have to make it feel too much like the game. And it's like, it's impossible to do when you take it out of people's hands. You're just not going to do it.
Yeah. And I think another piece of evidence for that is a lot of like, going back to gamer brain, a lot of the reception is like, thing good when things same, because like how many times have you seen like, and for the show's credit, I didn't think there were like that many moments where it was like that was ripped straight from the game. Like there were a few.
There's a few.
But for how many hours of content there is in this show, there was a lot of stuff that was either a new fresh take or original dialogue. But a lot of gamers clipping out those things like match cuts. It's like, oh yeah, this is good because this, and it's like, no, that's not why it's good. It's nice that they do that, but that's not the reason that this is a good story or a good adaptation.
Right.
There's nothing that jumps out at me just thinking real quick of a change that they made that I thought was bad. I'm sure there's something I was like, that wasn't that great, but like almost all of them.
Death, personally,
which one?
Tessa's death, I think it was like a little more of a whimper, but I get why they did it to like show the infected hive.
I don't know what you're talking about. I thought that kiss was extremely passionate.
Yeah, that part. That's right. Okay, that's right. I forgot about the kiss.
That was the one. That was the one change that I wasn't really in with. But
that's true.
Yeah,
I think by and large, though, I think the additions and adjustments they made were.
I agree.
Were good choices.
Same.
I'm trying to remember the game during the Kansas City era because I don't think that whole faction thing wasn't
in Kansas City in the game, but
it was somewhere else. But I don't remember that part of the game as well. I remember like Sam and Henry's whole thing, but I don't remember like the context around it.
Well, they made that character completely whatever her name was. I can't remember.
Kathleen.
Yeah.
Sam and Henry, you meet them on the run from the people they were with, but they don't really go into it more than that.
That's about all you know.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And you like sneak past the compound that they're in, like with the turrets and stuff, and then you're able to get out of the city, but that's really it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's refreshing my memory. Yeah, because I do feel like that faction stuff. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier in this that felt a little weaker than the rest of the show.
I know we wanted to get to this at some point, but I do think that element and like beginning that episode with like Ellie's kill, I think when that scene happened, I was like, oh, Neil's sprinkling in some part 2 into this here telling of season 1.
Yeah, before we move on to that, there's one other thing I want to talk about with part 1 or the season. And what did you guys did you ever get the vibe in the show where it was kind of like a Monster of the Week feeling? Like, all right, we wrapped up these awful people. Now here's the next one for this episode that we then 100%. Kill at the end of this episode. Now we move on to that was the one thing I was like, man, that kind of sucks. Like if they were going to expand stuff, I would have much rather have had a multi-episode arc with David than the thing in Kansas City.
Agreed.
Like make that bigger, make him a bigger thing. Cause he is like the most memorable antagonist dude that you run across in the entire game. It is wrapped up real quick, which kind of sucks.
Yeah. Like I think I would have rather 2 episodes on David, where the first episode you're almost tricked into like, oh, he seems like a cool dude.
He's a cool dude. Yeah, he's all right.
It's like a nice, friendly man of God.
No.
With just a few like that's a little eerie, but not too eerie. And then the second episode pays off like, oh, they're eating people. Like, I think I would have appreciated that more because I do agree that like I think it felt weirdly Monster of the Week for me in the Kansas City section. That to me felt like a Monster of the Week in the middle of a bigger show, I guess is how I kind of felt for it.
Well, what sucks is we had a little bit like I liked the Left Behind stuff, but it was also like, oh, we're taking us out of the story again for this another little. And I know there wasn't really a monster of the week, but it's like here's a little challenge of the week, a little side stories out of the way. We're back. I really like all the characterization stuff in that, but just it didn't help that feeling with the monster of the week thing that I kind of got the vibe of.
Right.
For the most part,
I'm not
status
arguing.
quo was maintained. Like status quo at the start of the episode is Joel and Ellie are alone walking. They're just about to arrive somewhere. And then by the end of the episode, they're just leaving somewhere and they are alone again.
Yeah. I think you're not wrong. I do think it works for this in terms of a structure. I when they announced it was going to be 9 episodes, though, I was like, oh, well, they don't have to do the entire first game in one season. And that's what I was hoping for until they started releasing trailers. I'm like, oh, that's winter. Okay, now they're doing the whole thing. You know?
Yeah.
Man, if they had cut off season 1 with the infected baseball stab, and
that's what I was
cut
thinking.
to black, and then they built up more with the preacher and some of the stuff like Left Behind being more fleshed out. I could definitely see that, and I'm glad that they're going to be like expanding it more going forward.
Me too.
They might have only had these 9 episodes proof of concept to be like,
that's the other thing.
You've got to make it work in 9 episodes, technically 10 episodes because season 1 is double.
Yeah, episode 1's 2 episodes, really.
Yeah, it's like 90 minutes, right? I mean, I think this is maybe a good way to tee us up into going forward and thinking about the future, unless there's any other thoughts anyone has about season 1.
It's good.
Yeah,
I'll watch it again
good
at some point.
Needs more puns.
So I think, Christian.
I was gonna say I'm leaning on. I think I prefer the way the show handles the story, but like I won't know for sure for a while. But I'm leaning that way right now.
I would agree with you. It's part of those like it's natural that everybody's gonna want, and we're gonna want to talk about game versus show, but they're accomplishing 2 different goals to me.
Yeah,
and I think I like them both for what they are.
Yeah,
but in terms of if I'm totally just about story, the show is head and shoulders above the game because the way they handle a lot of little moments and the way they characterize stuff is definitely a lot better.
It is much more impactful, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think too, like, because the story feels so grounded, pun not intended, right? In reality, that there are things that happen in the game that would just be ridiculous. Like, imagine if there's a whole scene where Joel's like trying to collect as many fucking supplements as he can find, and I was like, why are you getting all those vitamins? And he's like, this will make me headshot better.
Yeah,
like,
I did love
one workbench
in the last episode, like as he's going through his murder spree, like he's like, oh, this gun's out, let me grab this one, new gun,
picking up another gun.
Oh, pistol, okay, now I gotta use a pistol. I'm like, that is how you do these games. You gotta,
that's right,
Uncharted style, you gotta work with what you got.
Yeah, but I think there's just those weird game moments, right? Where it's like he's just like it's this backpack full of scrap metal, right? That he can attach to his guns to make them reload faster. Like, no, that's just not. That's not how it works. Yeah. I'm trying to think about the
super spoilers.
Yeah, I think we can move into the bigger mega spoilers about season 2 or what we think could happen in season 2 based on part 2 of the video game. So expect spoilers for pretty much all Last of Us content. If you have not consumed it all and played it all, this is your warning.
So what we do know is that production has already begun. That there has been, that Druckmann has said that he wants to continue doing this with Bella Ramsey as Ellie for as long as she wants to do it. So there's zero plan to recast. And that in the GQ interview that I read, when they asked about like the length of part 2 compared to part 1,
so much bigger.
Druckmann did say that they are planning on not doing it in a single season, but they got cagey and avoided stuff when they were asked specifically how many seasons are you looking at. So we do at least know that what's going to happen with season 2 will be multiple seasons, and how that plays out. I really, really hope that it is not that we get like a season of Ellie and a season of Abby. I hope it's not that also. So disappointed.
I don't think it will be.
Season 2, the Ellie side. Season 2, the Abby side.
I mean, because I like getting a little, throwing a little fuel on the fire with some of these things because I think it can usually be effective, specifically with part 2. But I think it'd be neat if it was like, okay, we come back for season 2, end of the episode. Again, spoilers. Joel dies, and then we just continue with Abby. Because then, like, you're being forced to, as an audience, like as a passive experience, have to relate to this character in a way that I think wouldn't be as effective if you get to see it back and forth. Because I think it would be a lot, like, very jarring. So I think because of how divisive that element of the game is, the way to replicate that is do that first, and then promise the audience you get to return to Ellie for the like B side. So you don't get that initial drop off maybe. But again, I don't think they'll do that. I think it would be fun if they did that, but I don't think they'll do that.
It's going to be complicated no matter what.
Yeah, I think I said this in a podcast that we did. I think it was when we were talking about episode 1, is where what I really hope they do at the start of season 2 is it just starts in media res, basically in that scene where Abby's dad is freeing the zebra. Basically do that, but for an hour. Do what they did with the first episode of season 1, where it's just like an hour with Sarah and Joel. You get to know them. You get to know them before their trauma happens, right? And then the trauma happens and Joel's set in his ways, and you get to kind of get a peek behind his psyche, right? I want them to do that with Abby, leading up to the trauma moment of finding out her dad has been shot in the head by some crazy raider, right? And then maybe that episode ends with her killing Joel. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I think they do need to establish in the beginning, like, Abby isn't a villain. Maybe she's an antagonist in like the clinical description of the word, right? And that she is the opposing force to Ellie, not necessarily the evil force. But I think they need to establish her motivations pretty upfront to the audience. That way, like, you can kind of get why this is a two-sided, cycle of revenge, et cetera, story.
Yeah. I think that's a good comparison because similar to how you start with Sarah in the first game and you have like, it's very brief, but you have that direct connection again that we're talking about that the show doesn't have. Towards the beginning of part 2, you do play as Abby before she did the thing that pissed off everybody, right? So like you're connecting with this character in this way. Like, I want to have her survive. I want to get to the thing. I want to have her meet these characters. And not being able to have that connection, that's like 5 minutes of screen time in terms of what actually went down as a player. So like they need to do that a different way. And I really like that idea of starting with her as a mirror to the first episode of season 1. That's good.
Yeah.
I just realized they're probably gonna spoil who Abby's father is in one of the trailers, aren't they?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, I see it playing out. Pedro Pascal's a hot commodity at the moment. I think he's going to feature very heavily in season 2. I don't think he dies till the end of the season.
You think so?
I think so.
Interesting.
Do you think then because I was considering this as a possibility. Do you think they go like chronologically?
Well, yeah, I think we spend some time in Wyoming and you get to see that life, how it is there, and whatever story stuff's going to be going on at that moment. But we spent a lot of time with Abby just doing her normal life. I don't even think it may not even acknowledge, oh yeah, her parents are dead. We're not focused on the trauma of that at the moment. And then because if I'm thinking of someone doesn't know the story, that would be a really big reveal of like, oh, we've gotten to know Abby. We really like her. We know nothing about her. Then there's, oh my God, what is she doing with Joel? And then
what's she doing with that club?
Murders him.
Yeah. I would love if they did that. I wonder because there is that, elephant in the room of the internet.
Yeah.
So, if they do that where like Joel doesn't die till the end of the season, the top comment on every internet thread
Joel
for
dies.
every week's going to be,
dies.
when does Joel die?
Yeah.
When is he going to get hit?
Well, maybe not to the end of the season, but I don't think it's going to happen right away.
That's interesting. I think that'd also be a good approach.
Because I think they'll set up Abby. They'll spend a lot of time setting her up to why. Why should we? Why do they? Or how are they going to create that conflict in people's minds immediately?
How about
how they feel in the moment?
What if it opened with not him getting killed, but just with Ellie kind of in grief, and then it flashes back, and then that will at least set up like we know that that there's an expiration date to this, and then that would at least get fuel away from the fire for every single internet comment. It would be like, when's he gonna die? But then it would allow us to then look at those like flashback moments, knowing like these are some of the lost moments, and still do that building up of character, but not just having a whole season where we're all just like waiting for it to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's worth noting too that, like you said, Otton, Mr. Pascal is a very hot commodity.
Yeah,
And
I'm
even
just thinking of it that way, yeah, too.
But even after he dies, you can bet your ass he's not gonna not be in the
Oh
show.
yeah, they'll still
Yeah.
well, just like in the game, there's plenty of scenes with Joel after he's
Right.
dead.
Like they've got to have the museum flashback, they've got to
yeah.
have the arguments flashback, and I hope they add a flashback of a scene where Joel's teaching Ellie how to golf, because I think that'd be very funny.
Well,
But
yeah,
other
because
than that, yeah,
there is a lot of Joel they could sprinkle in throughout, right? Like
Oh, for sure.
they could even like shift some of the flashbacks around, so it's like every other episode basically you get a Joel scene. Honestly, like
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it's going to be weird that it'll be like juggling between 3 characters. We'll have the Ellie story, the Abby story, and the Joel flashback story.
That's kind of partly what makes me think that he might be sticking around longer in this whatever this iteration is. Part of what makes me maybe not is the whole part of one of the biggest points or not the biggest things that they were trying to challenge players with the second game is, all right, now you have to go play the fucking person you hate, and we're going to spend hours trying to make you feel that you don't like, that you kind of understand or like them now, even though you're like, oh fuck this, I don't play Abby, she fucking killed Joel, fuck this sucks.
Yeah, because I think that
go ahead.
Well, that's one of the tricks the game is trying to do, right? That's the hat trick it's trying to nail. Is can you like the person that killed your protagonist in the first game?
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge. Like this is like round 2 of the challenge. I bet Neil's thinking of that right now. It's like, how do we endear the audience to Abby more? Because that's consistently one of the criticisms or just talking points I hear the most, is just that people aren't in love with Abby. They don't really connect with her character. Like maybe begrudgingly toward the end, they're like, oh, she seems okay, but it's still like, I don't root for her. Like I really commonly hear people talk about how in the second game, you get to the end of Abby's section and it goes right back to the scene where Abby and Ellie are fighting in that like theater on the stage. And I very commonly hear people say like, I try to, as Abby, let Ellie kill me to see if the story will continue. Like, there's like a choice you can make, but it never is. You have to almost kill Ellie in that moment, But the fact that is something I've heard a lot of people say, I think very clearly shows the hat trick with Abby isn't as successful maybe as the whole first game in its hat trick.
I think that's
clearly what Druckmann needs to do is just let Joel live, and then everyone lives happily ever after, and that will be it. And I think that everyone will be very happy with that ending.
Season 2 is a slice of life.
That's right.
That is why, though, I do lean on, I think they have to rip the Band-Aid off sooner, because with the game you have that, like, even though you lose Joel almost immediately, you do have a lot of like comfort time with Ellie. And I think by the time you get to Abby, it's like you're already invested so deep in the game at that point that like, because like of physical like playtime, you're just ready to drop off. But I do think like if you shift that around a little bit, even if like Abby kills Joel immediately and then you force a viewership to like see her side of it, there's less of a tendency to be like angry, I guess, because I think there will be a lot of ripple effects with part 2 because of the medium it's in, where I keep going back to that player connection. I think that is super key to why that outrage happened, where the audience who doesn't have that, who again, very clearly, at least based off of social media last night, people were like, wait, so Joel's just an asshole? Joel's a bad guy? Like that was very apparent last night on Twitter for people who didn't know this. I think they'd be more open to seeing an Abby perspective earlier, even having her kill Joel. Like,
Agreed.
I think the difference in medium is going to affect that story heavily, not just with structure, but I think with the audience or the relationship to the audience.
Yeah. I think it's just those same people who realized on Twitter, oh my God, Joel's actually an asshole. They're the same people who would be like, okay, I totally get why Abby did this.
Exactly. So I
know?
think like working that in earlier might benefit an adaptation compared to a game.
But I think that's that the struggle of how you feel for Abby. They don't want you to be convicted any one way or the other that quickly. I don't think. Like that's part of the purpose, because like you're mentioning people wanting to just let Ellie kill Abby. Like the game forcing you to do that is still being like, well, so you're just gonna have to live with this for now. We want you to be conflicted with these feelings, because the part of the point of the game, the story of it is there's really no difference between Abby and Ellie. And if this was Ellie in Abby's shoes, she'd be doing the same shit. She is doing the same thing.
That's the other thing too.
She's doing the exact same story.
I think the audience connection to Ellie, seeing her go through these things first, would also like cause the audience to have some kind of blindness to that of like, oh, I understand why she's doing this. She's not doing anything wrong.
You're totally invested on her side.
Please. Yeah. But if you like save that, by the time you get to see like pick up with Ellie again and be like, oh, like you have that doubt more like sooner with Ellie than you do in the game. And I think that doubt with Ellie only comes into play in like Santa Barbara kind of. And I think for a show dragging out that sort of turn for questioning Ellie, that's kind of a long wait to do that. I think.
Yeah, that's what I wonder about that. But like, I guess part of it is creatively, what do they want? Do they want people to be wrestling with how they feel, or do they want people to have a split choice? Like, do they want to have them be like, oh fuck, I don't know how to feel in this moment, or do they want us to be like, okay, I feel pretty good about how I feel now, but then challenge that,
right?
Like, which way are they wanting to go with it?
Right, and that's going to be really difficult too, because like the end goal of the game essentially is, that the cycle of violence is never good, and that revenge and violence is like, it's always going to lead to bad, feelings and bad motivations. And I think the longer the show takes to get to that reveal, the more the show will feel, I don't want to say pointless, but like it's kind of, like relishing in its like revenge and like violence, right? Which then kind of goes it's counterproductive to what the show is, or what the show is trying to say, or at least what it might be trying to say, right?
Yeah, because I think a lot of the way the game delivers that is like you are the person doing that, and again, the show, that's not it. You gotta view it how it is. So very curious to see how they handle that.
Yeah, I think what's going to be really interesting to see moving forward is that, Craig Mazin has had a pretty blank check from HBO since Chernobyl, right? Now I think he has like, if there's something bigger than a blank check, like a blank checkbook, I don't know, but like I'm sure after the last
give him a blank giant check, like they would on game shows.
I'm sure he could be like, okay, that scene where Ellie and Joel are in the museum and she goes to the moon? I want to send a crew to the moon to film this scene. Can we make that happen? And HBO will be like, we'll figure that out.
It's probably got House of the Dragons money for sure now.
Yeah,
most likely.
So I'm gonna Tom Cruise it up.
Yeah.
Which will be interesting, because this is like in terms of settings, in terms of story, in terms of characters, it's a much, much bigger story. Like you said, I think it is at least twice as big of a story.
Yeah,
like it's big time. There's a lot going on.
Everyone for round 2 of assholes on the internet being assholes, because we know that storm is also coming.
I do.
I feel bad for whoever is casted as Abby.
Agree.
Because they're going to get a lot of shit they don't deserve.
Yeah.
Like the collective internet and fans of Last of Us need to get ready to like hunker down and protect.
Yeah, because I think, Scrappy, what you brought up of like just like the viewer angle of it and what we're talking about with Twitter, like I really don't see a world where an HBO audience who's viewing this first has that visceral reaction. Like the gamers, I think, are the ones who are gonna rear their heads again. But yeah, it's
gamer brain take over.
Gamer brain,
big gamer,
the real cordyceps.
Yes. Don't get bit by the gamers.
They'll get you.
They will.
Good thing they're all stuck in their basement, so we should be safe.
Oh boy. But I think regardless, there's a lot of people who are on board for season 2 for sure. Like that the Sunday night that comes out, you can bet your ass everyone at work Monday morning are going to be talking about.
People at my
Hell
work
yes.
are a bunch of middle-aged or older women that do not play games, and they're into Last of Us. Like talking about Last of Us. She's like, "Did you watch it before you came to work?" I was like, "I couldn't." Like, because she couldn't. She's like, "I was gonna be pissed if you watched it before I did."
Yeah. So, but I think season 2 is going to be huge for sure. Like numbers wise, I'm sure it's just going to keep going up. But as somebody who narratively has a couple like issues with the structure of part 2, I think similar to what I felt with season 1 of this show, I think I have faith that they will really like over deliver on the task that is that second story because of just how effective they were at, I think, being more impactful here. So I'm very excited for part 2 to be a season.
Agreed. And I think just the way the plot is, I think it will benefit a lot from being a TV show instead of a video game.
Definitely.
You think we get a Bill-esque episode in season 2 of some kind where we're spending time to see something of people living in this world?
I'm sure we will get a full episode or 2 about Lev and
Yep. That I figured. Those are bigger than Bill because Bill was never as big as those were in terms of in comparison to.
Hey, now that season 1 is done, can we start like a hashtag to get the full like hour 40-minute cut of episode 3?
Yeah, no kidding. I'd watch that.
Oh, the Snyder cut of it?
Yeah. Let's get the Snyder cut for what is truly one of the greatest love stories of our time.
Yeah,
in
black and
the
white.
shit out of an hour 40-minute version of that, and I think timed well, like in like 6 months or something, it could do a lot to like keep the series relevant. To be like,
season.
I wasn't thinking about rewatching it, but hey, there's this new episode 3. Man, that episode 3 was good. Oh, I guess I can rewatch the rest of it as well, and do what it can to like be ever present.
I think the real question is when season 2 drops in what, year and a half, 2
That's
years?
Generous. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe. Do we get The Last of Us Part 2 remake around that time?
I feel like a director's cut is on the table for the next 12 months. If I'm being real, it's overdue. They got that multiplayer game too. They're gonna do something.
Yeah, that's right. They got the multiplayer coming.
Yeah, because it's aged horribly since the PS4. Like I can't even play it now. It looks bad.
It's still wild to me that game played on the PS4.
Yeah, seriously. I can't believe I played it on the PS4, and for some reason, my brain for a second there was like, I totally played it on PS5, right?
Looks like a PS5 game.
It does, yeah.
It does, yeah. It really does.
I'm ready for season 2 to have their marketing be, are you hashtag Team Ellie or hashtag Team Abby?
Yeah, that'll be.
They don't need to pull a Halo 4 with their
Team Abby.
Team Abby, Team Abby. Oh my god, they're so gonna do that, aren't they?
They are, and I will be putting hashtag Team Abby in my name. People, come for me. I don't care.
Oh man, that can be a great Twitter poll that you set up closer to season 2 release. Make everyone angry.
I will.
You think that if it continues to be popular and gets even bigger with season 2, that we'll get a prequel with Ashley Johnson? Follow her time.
Maybe that would be awesome.
I don't think we are. I'm just trying to think of in a suit's brain.
Yeah,
I'm remembering
who's her dad.
Leading up to season 1, I think Craig said like they're open to the idea of exploring other stories in the world.
Yeah.
So like, and then we also learned very recently that like there was supposed to be a DLC for the first game about Anna. So like, I wouldn't be surprised if we get like a interquel, like 90-minute thing to bridge the wait.
Maybe she's not in touch with the dad because it was just a one-night stand when she was passing through David's encampment, and the dad was none other than Troy Baker himself.
No.
No.
That's some like, hey, Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter bullshit. That's what that
spoiler.
Vibe. That's what that vibe was.
The spoilers tag is up. We can spoil anything right now.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Snape kills Dumbledore.
What?
He was dead the whole time.
Yeah.
I think more stories, especially at like the beginning of the world, like the fall of everything, would be really interesting. Like, but yeah, like a Marlene Anna adventure would be so much fun.
Yeah, I'm down for that.
Yeah, because it's Neil and Craig are the ones who are like they're gonna keep that team dynamic going. It's all Neil. Only has like 3 games working on at Naughty Dog right now. He can write a half season of TV on top of that.
And maybe at some point they'll make an Uncharted adaptation of some kind that'll be just as good.
Yeah, it was okay.
You're
making that joke like it was a pile of shit, but it wasn't. It was just
fun.
okay. It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fine. I won't remember anything of it in a couple years, but it was fine.
I do have
Nolan North's cat.
Yeah.
A fun hypothetical. What do we see first? Season 2, episode 1, or the announcement of the inevitable part 3 that they're absolutely working on currently?
Season 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
What if season 2 post-credit scene, The Last of Us Part 3?
The trailer for
a trailer.
The teaser trailer.
Because like I do think it's coming. Like with especially the show being so popular now. I know Naughty Dog has like their own agency under PlayStation, but like how huge this show is, they're not gonna.
And
Martin this.
Yeah, Ellie's character at the end of part 2, they've got a lot of ways they go with shit. She's not exactly a happy camper. I'll say, not really happy with life at the end of that.
Yeah. And I mean, they're introducing lore stuff in the show now. Like, again, there could be a way to learn more about how the stopping of the infection happens. Like, there's a lot they could do, and I think they will want to absolutely tell that story and give it an ending before HBO gets to that point. And I don't think HBO, the Warner company, is going to be like, yeah, we'll wait for you. Do it when you want to do it. Like, I think they will move ahead,
Well, HBO also doesn't have a great track record of getting ahead of the source material.
Exactly. So that's why I'm thinking, like, regardless of what Naughty Dog wants to do, I do think they'll probably push.
We got at least 2 seasons worth.
Yeah, for sure.
At least.
Yeah. There's no way they're not going to
if we're looking at
another season.
If we're looking at it timeline-wise, we've had the first Last of Us in 2013, second in 2020. If we would even say that the next one was going to be 2027, then if we're expecting a season 2 of Last of Us TV show to be 2024, 2025, then they would be making season 3 of The Last of Us while the game would probably be in marketing.
Yeah.
So
plenty
of lead time.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's potential.
Yeah. I think the hard part for that will be if they're marketing part 3, the video game, while season 3, the show, is coming out. How do you market it without spoiling part 2, the video game, and season 3 of the show? Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Like if you start seeing shots of Ellie with only 3 fingers, you're gonna be like, well, something happened. I don't know what, but something did.
I mean, well,
And
so what? The next thing that we have to look forward to is Horizon and God of War TV shows.
And neither of them. Yeah, like I think God of War will be coming on Amazon Prime, and then Horizon, the TV show, on Netflix. I don't know off the top of my head if we know the showrunners.
I mean, Corey is working on God of War, and I think the Wheel of Time showrunner for Amazon is doing that show.
Yeah, which I'm not happy about, but
yeah, you were not a fan of the Wheel of Time.
Amazon I don't think it's a very good show.
Yeah,
I think it kind of sucks. I think they made a lot of bad creative decisions on it also.
Right.
But anyway, I think what would make it successful is what made this successful is Neil was heavily involved. So if someone like the creative visionary for it is there every step of the way, I think that would be helpful for it.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking, is that it really is based on, because when you see the credits of the Last of Us, like the TV show, at the end of it, the PlayStation Studios logo shows up. So they pretty clearly have a big hand in all this. Like it's more than just, oh yeah, you can use our IP for whatever you want. Right? They're very much crafting the story in a way. So you can only hope that they would do the same with God of War, and I guess with Horizon.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm still waiting on that Uncharted 2 announcement.
Another Sony Pictures exclusive.
Marky Mark.
Yeah. Give him that stash.
And Spidey.
Together again.
Wait till Marky Mark's in Marvel and he interacts with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
What if Marky Mark is like a Deadpool type character? So he's just breaking the third wall or fourth wall. It'd be great.
He couldn't pull that off. I'm sorry.
Only Ryan Reynolds can, I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, the new Deadpool coming, that's going to be in the MCU, right?
Yeah.
That'd
be fucking weird.
Right. And Wolverine's in it. Huge Jackman is in it.
Huge Jack. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But God of War, I think, is going to really ultimately depend on how much impact Corey has, I feel like, in the show.
I think part of what people do like God of War is such a different game in that, yes, there's a lot of cool, great character moments, but like you're going to need a lot of big set piece, cool shit. Because part of it is like Kratos does some cool shit. Like we need a lot of that going on. Yeah. Like some crazy shit's got to happen.
I was very surprised when they said it was not going to be animated. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was your choice.
I think the other thing too with it is that, it's technically, it's a lot of games. It didn't just start with 2018, right?
I guess so. Yeah. That's what we naturally think of.
Right. Because like 2018, that's the one where the story really takes the front seat instead of,
And I think that's the one that they've been talking about in marketing materials. Like the thing I'm worried the most about is Horizon, because that's like, I know Last of Us has a lot of overgrowth stuff, but Horizon's got like that and robot dinosaurs, like you can put some mushrooms on a man and then just like that's The Last of Us, but like you got that's a tall ask for that one.
Yeah, we'll see.
But
I mean, it's Netflix. It probably won't even go anywhere.
Yeah, Netflix knows what they're doing. Their Resident
well,
Evil
actually, it'll be
show
canceled in a season. I mean,
just probably they may not even get to the reveal of this as a post apocalypse.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my main concern with the God of War show is, I guess, like how much are they going to bring in the pre-2018 stuff? Because I think a lot of the impact of it from a narrative perspective is the context you have of like what Kratos used to be like,
Yeah.
Yeah. But how much of that do they bring into the show?
Yeah. I mean, to their credit, I only knew Kratos from trailers from the old games, and I was like, no thanks, So
yeah, like I only learned more about the original trilogy and the other spin-offs like after playing 2018. But then, after learning about that stuff, and then when I replayed 2018 before Ragnarok, I realized how much subtext or like references or like, the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen, moments that I didn't get because I didn't play the original games.
There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of, big character stuff for Kratos, and there's more so in the PSP, the handheld games, than the
that's
games.
the one I had.
But I don't know. Yeah, because if it's, if they can't do much more than like it's just basically boss fight, but like I'm killing a god over and over again,
right?
In those, so.
Like, I think unlike The Last of Us, I think a majority of the fun in God of War is the big action, right?
Oh yeah, I loved all the character stuff, but yeah, that's definitely like I want to see some cool shit happen.
Like that's a show where like you need to see that to really deliver on a God of War adaptation. Whereas The Last of Us, as we've clearly seen, you can get away without as much zombie encounter, right?
Oh yeah.
But I think this is feel like a good place to end our little The Last of Us discussion spoiler cast thing. If you got to this point and you haven't seen it yet, sorry we spoiled it, but also still go watch it. It was pretty good.
Yeah, don't get angry.
Also, play the games; they're pretty great.
Yeah, I've heard they're pretty good. I haven't played them myself. Big fan though.
I hear they're selling real well again. So
yeah, I'm sure.
Especially when they re-release part 2 for season 2 and 3. But yeah, I think that does it for this little video chat we did here. We hope you enjoyed, and if you did, hit the subscribe button. If you haven't, check back on our podcast. We release that every Monday, and we'll catch you around.
That's right. Bye-bye.
See ya.